Bonjour à toutes et à tous, j'espère que vous allez bien. Bienvenue au NIFFF 2025 et au lancement de cette deuxième journée du symposium Imaging the Future avec un invité de marque, un enfant du pays, Jean de Meuron. Alors comme son nom l'indique, on se doute bien qu'il vient de pas très loin, mais il est parti très loin, qui s'est envolé pour Hollywood, qui a déjà une carrière prolifique à son actif. Notamment, il a travaillé pendant 6 ans avec son mentor Roland Emmerich, rien que ça. Il a aussi été l'assistant de Tim Fehlbaum pour le film Tides que nous avions montré, un magnifique film de science-fiction suisse que nous avions montré en 2021 au NIFFF. Et puis là, nous avons la grande chance d'avoir en première européenne le premier court-métrage de Jean de Meuron, donc The Edge of Space, qui a été pas mal déjà reconnu et admiré dans le milieu et qui a été shortlisté notamment aux Oscars pour le meilleur court-métrage cette année. Donc c'est vraiment pas rien, vous allez le découvrir sur l'écran et ensuite Jean viendra parler de son travail, de son film avec Blaser, que nous avons la chance d'accueillir aussi. Merci beaucoup et bonne projection à toutes et à tous, bonne conférence.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for being here for this early screening of the beautiful short Edge of Space from Jean de Meuron. Before I start, or we start, actually, I want to give some thanks. First of all, thank you very much to the NIFFF to invite us, to having us here, to the whole crew, and also big thanks to Nadesh, she organized everything and treated us very well. I mean, it's really awesome. Second one is Vincent Frey from Art of Visual Effects. Thank you very much for making this possible and also being a big beacon in the visual effects industry in Switzerland, also by creating a new platform, Helvetic Motion Art, dedicated to the visual effects industry in Switzerland. And Jean for having me here, although I didn't really work on this beautiful short, but to invite me here to lead that talk. But we did work together. That when we met, I think 14 years ago, when I hired you as an actor, not knowing that it was part of your journey being or becoming a director. Yeah, so beautiful movie. Thank you very much. It's amazing.
Thank you.
And yeah, what was the initial thought that you started this short together with Daryl?
So yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you also Vincent, Nadesh, Pierre-Yves, and Stuart. Pleasure meeting you guys today. And Philip, hi. And thank you for the audience. My journey in Hollywood pretty much began after interning at Paramount, MGM, and Universal Studios with Roland Emmerich, who was one of my dear mentors. And Edge of Space began because I was working with Roland on Moonfall, the movie where the moon is out of orbit and then on a collision course with Earth, which Framestore did also some VFX. And that gave me first-hand insights into the origins or story of NASA, because every time in Hollywood you have like a NASA logo, it's a trademark, so you have to have the approval from NASA as a government agency. And so the gentleman was Bert Ulrich, and he also worked with Nolan on Interstellar. He consulted Damien Chazelle on First Man, Ridley Scott on The Martian, you name it. So he became sort of like also a mentor of mine. I'd always been fascinated with space and its exploration. It started, the Wright brothers, early in the 20th century. We had the first manned flight, and then within a couple of decades, just 6 decades later, we went to the moon, which I thought was incredible. And it started all in the 50s and 60s with the space race. And so I had this crazy idea to trace the origins of space exploration, like Philip Kaufman's The Right Stuff, which is based on the book by Tom Wolfe. And I started to research, like, how did that start from, pilots that were actually recruited by NASA, and then they were the Mercury 7, and went to Gemini, and then Apollo. And for me, it was very interesting. We have seen in Apollo 13 or First Man, we have seen the moon landing, but we haven't seen yet where it all began, and I thought I wanted to put a stamp, or like we saw it in the right stuff, but I wanted to go back to the origins and trace like when it all started, and Kennedy kind of like ushered in the space race.
Nice. Yeah, it was really cool and really beautiful made. And it also has a little bit touch of Steven Spielberg, right? So.
Yeah. Big influence of mine, obviously Steven Spielberg is one of my all-time favorite directors. So of course, cinematographically, like in terms of the visual language of the film, I'm definitely inspired. I'm sure a lot of you know this as filmmakers as well. A lot of it was shot during Magic Hour and Golden Hour. Yeah. So definitely Terrence Malick's approach, like in Days of Heaven or Badlands or The Thin Red Line, like available light. But then also very that Spielbergian, uplifting, inspiring. So you see, I didn't want to go into the politics at all. I hope I treated the Soviet Union or the US equally, because, it was not about, let's say, communism is bad or capitalism, like two opposing, let's say, political systems. It was just about us as a species embarking on this adventure. And as Neil Armstrong says, we as like one small step for man, but a giant leap for mankind, like all-encompassing. So for me, it was us as a species that went to the moon and, achieved something incredible in terms of scientific innovation, human perseverance. And I figured like Spielberg's escapism was a really beautiful way to tell that in the opening, obviously very much inspired by Empire of the Sun, which I'm sure a lot of you saw the reference, but kind of like the boy. That for me is a great way to start a journey, as a kid that looks up to, let's say, his parent or his father, and then embarking on his own journey to sort of like reaching farther and higher and going, to the attainable space, it seems.
Nice. It's really cool made. So you said like, okay, you shot a lot in the magic hours. So means you have like, what, 2-3 hours maybe? Or
20 minutes, 25 minutes,
depending on what.
So what we did, a good friend of mine works for Terrence Malick, and she explained to me like how they do it. So they really meet a couple of hours before sunset, or like magic hour, blue hour, and then they block the scene, and then whenever they have those crucial 20 minutes, that's when they shoot. And we shot with 2 cameras, so you had like a little longer lens for the master shot, which was on a crane, so I could really block like the Spielbergian one, or like the mise en scène, like the whole scene. We filmed the master, I was like one shot with blocking, with actors walking, the camera panning, so very motivated camera moves. And then I had a Steadicam operator with a longer lens, sort of like going in for the close-ups, so like capturing the coverage, like the emotions. And yeah, we shot this in 4 days, believe it or not. And how we also scheduled this, we would literally film in the evening, let's say from 6 to, let's say, 7:30, 8 p.m., like have really that crucial, and you see the sun on the horizon going down really fast. So then I would shoot one side, let's say, of the coverage, and then we would wrap, quickly go to rest, and then the next morning, so we would have the same lighting conditions. So during sunrise, because like it has the same warmth in terms of color palette and tone, so we would then pick up again and continue to shoot the scene the next morning. So for instance, we did that when the X-15, when he walks towards the X-15, and then when he lands, so that was literally much in the morning during sunrise, and then later we picked it up in the evening during sunset.
Okay. I think that's a heavy amount of planning. Yeah. And of course, I think then you have always the whole set turning 180 degrees. Correct. Because the sun is...
Correct, and that's why, in terms of continuity, good point, so that's why you had to be very careful, so that not in one shot, the sun is, as you said, you turn 180, like the sun is suddenly on that horizon, and then when you turn, it's suddenly on the other horizon. Yeah. So we needed to make sure that actually, the sun had set over the horizon, so then you have like kind of like the evenly lit sort of like feel and mood.
Wow, amazing, crazy. And yeah, it has also a lot of visual effects in it, of course.
Yes, that's why we're here for.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, tell us about visual effects work. I mean, how you did approach the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that pretty much I was mentored by Roland Emmerich, and I had the opportunity to shadow him during Moonfall. So sometimes I would sit in and Stuart listen when he talked to Framestore, and just like how he directs with his VFX supervisors, and like how he talks, like how he communicates. And because most of the time you start from scratch. So for instance, on this shot, if you want to show that, Andrea, so you start from scratch. Obviously, I didn't have the X-15 flying. There's like 3 X-15s, which is the plane. There's literally 3 X-15s left in the world. One is like at the Smithsonian in DC, then one is, I think, else at the Flight Museum somewhere in the Midwest, and then one is at Edwards Air Force Base. So you don't have that plane flying anymore. So on the ground, we actually had a real replica. And what we did, we would scan that and photograph it during different times during the day. So we had different lighting conditions and how, let's say, the light would bounce off and reflect of the metal. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, this is an incredible piece of aviation. It's one of the fastest planes ever built. It's like 6 times the speed of sound, so Mach 6, we call that. And it would literally, because as you saw when it lands, it had like almost like skis, like slids. So the wings are so short, so it cannot take off by itself. So it has to have a mothership, a B-52. As you see, I went really deep into the research, into the physics and aerodynamics. So it's dropped, and then the astronaut would literally engage the thruster, and then it would sort of like, in an instant, like a thrust of thousands of forces, G, 6, would then like pressure you, and then it would ascend, but it only had enough fuel to literally go to the edge of space, which NASA defines as the Kármán line at 30 miles above sea level. And the fuel would run out, and so the Earth's gravitational pull would then pull the plane back to Earth. And that's actually where the conflict ensues. And Neil Armstrong had a mission where he bounced off the atmosphere. So look, just a couple of research. This is what NASA provided me with. You see like the thrusters and stuff. So this is literally archival footage at NASA that I had access because they supported me and gave me like access to their footage. So see, also what I did, you recognize some shot angles. What I did, because I wanted to be as realistic as possible, sometimes I would see where would NASA mount the camera. Like oftentimes it's either a pilot that flies handheld nearby and films how the X-15 is launched, or it was attached to like one of the planes. And so you saw a couple of frames, like for instance from behind, I would then use some of those as inspiration, as reference to make, and then we would that was almost like served as a previs, so to speak. And then we would, of course, I would choose different focal lengths, let's say either for dramatic impact or like a little slightly different angle. But as you can see how the plane ascends, or like the exhaust, of course, sometimes we add a little bit more for cinematic, dramatic effect. But as you can see there is the exhaust, and how it ascends, and like the condensation of the rubs of the plane, right? And so we went highly with the VFX team into the physics also of how a X-15 launches and what would that look like and sound like and feel like.
I think you did really good job, because as I saw it the first time as in screening in Zurich, it was really amazing. I really was also fascinated with all the space race and everything, and NASA and every footage I can get on in the early days. And I was really impressed, like you really got the focus on the similarity from really the NASA videos, like really seeing that kind of
look here,
stuff.
for instance, you see, that's for instance a shot. You see, we have that when he pulls off the stick and then it ascends. See, that was, for instance, like we looked, where did NASA mount the actual camera? Because that was a research plane, technically. So of course, what helped was sort of like measure like how, let's say, an X-15 would react in space, the friction upon re-entry and stuff. So of course they had all these different cameras mounted onto the plane. And so, see, that was, for instance, a shot that we were inspired by to mount the camera similarly. So it felt like, oh, NASA is technically doing research of the plane.
Super cool. Yeah, and how much time took the whole visual effects production?
Yeah, so of course we did this very much as a favor. I worked for almost 2 years, because of course, like, there's a company called VFX Los Angeles, good friends of mine, and they had worked with Gareth Edwards on The Creator. And so that was also a massive inspiration because, of course, as you might have guessed, like, we never had near the budget that you think the film was shot at, I mean, I can tell within it's like definitely not in the millions. It was more like in the around 200,000, so it's like massive favors. But like Charles, he had mentored me how Gareth Edwards, who also has a very intelligent way of approaching visual effects. He's very efficient and effective. Like, he uses like the parallax, for instance, like in the background, let's say he shoots plates for real, but then he adds visual effects blurry in the background, so it doesn't look you don't have to be as polished, but still gives you the sense, because in an interview that he had given, he said that the human eye perceives pretty much within 20 to 30 meters, like everything sharp, and then everything further in the distance, you kind of like, it blends more in, like in terms, that's how you said, that's how the parallax works. And I thought, oh, that's quite interesting. So in the desert, we didn't shoot at Edwards Air Force Base. It's still an operational Air Force base. So as a non-US citizen, you're not allowed to even approach within a mile. So we found a lake bed that was adjacent, very similar in terms of its mountain range and the terrain. And what we did, we then had photographs from the 1960s or like research how Edwards Air Force Base looked like, with the control tower, and we built Edwards Air Force Base. So actually we have if you want to quick pull that up, we have a VFX reference, I think, so people can see. So look exactly here, if you go back, if you go to that shot there you just had with the mountain range. So just so people see how we recreated, here. So for instance, just so a little understanding how we recreated Edwards Air Force Base in a 3D environment. So see, like now it goes back, and there was nothing surrounding the, does it play?
Somehow it stuck.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Does it play?
Actually, no.
Do you have something?
It's like that.
Oh, okay, do you have? I mean, so here, for instance, in the background, that's what I mean. So that was added in visual effects, like the hangars or the B-52 that you see in the distance. So the foreground is real, obviously, with the plane. And then we added the, the layer, you see, like the runway we added. And we added just for depth purposes, more layers, right? And then you see as it gets more, I mean, there was also the length with which I shot, like let's say a 50, I think. So the depth of field would be narrow, but see, it's still kind of blurry. So still your eye is drawn to the foreground, and you see like the light hits him nicely on the shoulder, like a nice little rim light. But then, so like the background you perceive, but it's still not the primary focus, right? So that was all added digitally in visual effects. Nice.
So it's also easier when you turn by sunset and sunrise. Correct, on the 80 degrees, so can achieve that. Great, cool.
Do you have more? Like we have more. Yeah. So see, for instance, also the B-52, right? That I didn't have, for instance, right? So that I then with a drone, I filmed a lot of the clouds. I filmed myself. So see, like you see the background plate, and then you see we added the B-52 onto, let's say, I had like really with a drone crew, we were filming for like 2 hours, and so I had like at least reference in terms of speed, in terms of cloud formations, because I noticed like the elements are the hardest to recreate in the effects, especially clouds. So I wanted to have a good reference, and then we obviously added the B-52. So none of everything in space or that was flying was mostly VFX, either with plates or completely recreated.
Okay.
So see, that was the angle I was mentioning before. You see, kind of like attached on the wing. You see, so like from behind, right, the X-15, so you can really feel the exhaust. You see, so we had like, that was, for instance, you see with the plate, like we had the clouds, and we added obviously different layers of texture to give it sort of like that realness, when it drops.
Amazing. Absolutely great.
And if you want to show some more, that was the other angle I mentioned, kind of like attached to the X-15. The other one is a little bit more tilted, but of course here we wanted to have a more clear view. And you see like the condensation, how it, like the aerodynamics, how it kind of like pushes off the back and like the contrail. And so see, that's sort of like how we were inspired by certain angles within the framing and the composition. Here, for instance, as you might have noticed, my dad did once a very smart observation. If you want to pause this. So when we watched Star Wars, he said, oh, so interesting, the wide shots are super wide epic, like Lawrence of Arabia, this massive, big scale, like, anamorphic big shots. But then when it comes to the human, we're so small in the big cosmos of space. So I remember that, and that inspired me to, whenever we're inside the cockpit, I use the longer lens, like anything of focal length from a 80 to 100 millimeter. So it feels more claustrophobic, because then the field of view narrows. So it feels like also you're with him in the cockpit trapped, right? So it feels like more like you feel claustrophobic, but then as soon as we go out, I opened up to make it wider. And then, because also in terms of sound storytelling, there's no sound in space because of the vacuum, right? So how we solved that was he perceives obviously the cracking and you know, the plane almost falling apart, but when we cut outside, it's mostly actually the score that helps underlay the sound design, the sound effects, like a little swish of something, or like an instrument. So we played with that notion of it's almost silence out in space, and that's like the first time when you also kind of like his point of view, we completely stopped the music and just he takes in. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, in the 60s and 61, it was the first time that people had actually seen space from an effect that astronauts described as an overview effect, where you're just so sheerly overwhelmed with like how not insignificant we are, but how precious Earth is when you look at it from outer space, you know, and people have like sort of like this, they're almost like speechless, and that was kind of like how we go from him, his point of view, like almost like the Spielbergian wonder to the reference, and then open up what the protagonist sees, so the audience feels with him, with the protagonist.
Yeah, very nice. How did you build the whole the interior as a set piece, so
Correct,
you can change the lighting and
Correct,
everything?
yeah. So that, with my DP and the gaffer, so we built, so the cockpit we rebuilt, and we had historical reference pictures of how an X-15, so we had a physical, like cockpit where you could dismount the front, so I could at least put the camera, you know, within his view, right? But then when I had, like, say, over the shoulders, or like his point of view, we can literally just either do it from his point of view, or we just could disattach it and then just film close on the cockpit, the canopy, and like let's say all the gauges and stuff, which also were animated because of course they didn't move. So we filmed them as plates, but then we animated, let's say, so it looks like, let's say, he's ascending and flying.
Okay, nice.
Yeah. So cockpit was built, but then his point of view in, let's say, the clouds or in space or in the sky, that is a visual effect.
Okay, nice. Very nice.
I don't know. Do we have more references? Like, let's say what else we can talk.
Clicker.
Oh yeah, I see. So in terms of the X-15, quite interesting. Here, when you see, the canopy was sealed shut, so I couldn't open it. So see, sometimes, like we talked about it with Stuart yesterday, visual effects, of course, sometimes you really detect it, but sometimes visual effects can also be very small things that are undetectable, or things you don't see or perceive, let's say. So look, let's see if you go from here. We actually had to create the canopy. Yeah. So again, scanning it, you know, like, and then create a 3D model reference, so we could manipulate the canopy opening up, so that it's appropriate and correct in terms of the perspective.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
What else we have?
Oh yeah, maybe if you go to the first shot, right, just to number 4, if possible. So see, for instance, if that plays, so that's obviously does it play?
Yeah.
Perfect. You see, so that's obviously the shot when he ascends, and then we added sometimes, because we imagine, okay, that's a super long lens, like a 400 millimeter or so. So we added, you see, a little bit, and you see the chromatic aberration, like, so we added a little bit the chromatic aberration, but we also see how it's a little bit out of focus. Yeah. So almost like as if somebody is observing from Earth, but because it's so fast, doesn't quite catch the focus, so it's like slightly out of focus for a second and then finds it again, you know. So that's like if you want to play it again, so you see, like, and then it goes sharp, and then like it's almost like as if it's quickly out of focus.
Here
so see, like sharp,
it stops somehow.
So you want to go?
Just can you play that real quick? That was something. That's something, so for instance, like these little details that my visual effects supervisor and I would add. So to add this sort of like authenticity, so it feels like genuine, and it feels like not documentarian in a sense, because of course it's very. Is that it? Because I had a little... Here you go. So see, look, if you let it play, and then you see it goes from sharp here, and then you see it slightly shifts, it has a focus shift, and you see this is kind of like how we started in terms of previs, how I would communicate, probably for many of you in the audience, Philip and Stuart, that's for you. But just like, you see, so we started with the plane, so like what's the shot, what's the framing, and then we added, of course, layers and layers on top of, in terms of it's like the sky going by, and we added clouds to give a sense of speed and perspective.
Okay, nice, very nice.
Does that play? Yeah, if you move, see, so the contrail comes, then just the exhaust.
The background.
The background. And you see, look, but if you don't have clouds, you don't get a sense of movement, right? So these were certain like things that we added in the background.
Yeah, I do have a reference because it's also in...
And you see here, that's what I meant with a little focus shift, you see?
And
you see here it's out of focus, yeah.
The lens distortion.
Correct.
And noise and everything.
Correct, yeah, because we shot with anamorphic lenses, like Hawk V-lights. And you know how sometimes anamorphic lenses have little, distortion, exactly, especially at the edges, right, with the added layer of glass. And so these are just small little details that we wanted to add to give it sort of like nuance and layer and texture.
Nice.
And then you see exactly, good eye. We added a grain, so it's more like filmic.
Yeah.
So it's like formalistic, so of course I color graded it, very like saturated colors, right? And then to give it like, I went literally to my colorist and I showed him Oppenheimer and I said, I want the sort of like 70 millimeter Nolan look. And so he added like that refined little bit grain. So we shot it digital, so at least, but it has a little bit of a film more look.
Yeah. But you also framed like this really a little bit on the taste of the old 35 or even 60 millimeter style of film.
Correct, yeah. So at one point I was thinking of shooting 35 millimeter film, but then, especially during magic hour and gold now, you need to be very efficient. So that was an idea. And now in color grading, you can almost match it. Of course, like the colors in film, 35 was still, unmatched and super nice. But I felt like, because of course we need to work efficient and fast and effective, I felt like digital, and we shot with RE, which I really like, of course, the chip and the look it gives.
Yeah, that's really nice. So, will we ask some questions or open up for some questions?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So has anyone questions to Sean about the making of his beautiful short Edge of Space?
Hey Jean, so
that's Pascal.
Yeah. What was the story then? What were they researching? Where they were trying to find out what happened to a plane when you go.
Correct. Yeah. So X-15 was pretty much a research plane, and a rocket-powered, hypersonic plane, and exactly it was measure like in, for instance, frictions, right, in space, like re-entry, right. So. Correct. Yeah. So like.
Did they know about the re-entry, or they had no idea about re-entry angles and all that?
It was it's what I discovered. NASA, it's super scientific in terms of mathematics and physics. It's incredible, and of course, in like 1946, I think it was Chuck Yeager who was the first person who crossed the barrier for the speed of sound, and they actually didn't know whether he was gonna be blown to pieces or ripped apart, So that was like the first man. It was 46 or 47 in the X-1, that orange plane. So they didn't know whether you can actually break the barrier. It's almost like what Oppenheimer did with the atomic bomb, in Manhattan Project. You didn't know, was it going to evaporate or blow up the atmosphere, right?
Yes.
So I think there was this scientific innovation. At first, you didn't know, right? And then I think that's also like was a little bit an homage and a tribute of this short, like those brave pioneers who risked it all. And Kennedy says it in the speech, taking a clearly role to those, take a clearly role in space achievement, which may hold the future on our Earth. And I thought that was quite inspiring, that people willingly risk their life. And that's also the notion that his wife challenges, like, because there were accidents, like with the X-15, like they would go in a hypersonic tailspin, or the plane, there was one that broke apart, actually, and of course the pilot didn't survive, or the astronaut. So I think some things they knew, or they could probably make a best estimated scientific guess, and some actually they had to discover during the research, right? And also because the plane then changed sometimes, also there were 3 versions, so it changed also a little bit its like design, because at one point one actually upon landing broke, you know, because I think there was still too much fuel left, so the weight distribution was off, so the plane broke upon landing. So they did fixes as they progressed. But yeah, for me, it was really paying an homage and tribute to those early pioneers who kind of like risked it. And that's sort of like also what his wife challenges. Like, why do you willingly do that? Like, for what patriotic ideology? But for him, it's like, hey, but that's who I am. And so that's what's for me the central, let's say, human conflict, when the space was obviously man versus machine. Like, is the machine going to break apart, or is he going to come back to Earth? But yeah, no, very good question. Like, in terms of, I think they knew some stuff, but also others, they found out or like gained new knowledge upon those research flights.
Good. I have another one.
Oh.
Congratulations, great film. What was the biggest challenge visual effects wise? What was the hardest thing to actually get right?
Very good question. No, it's like, yeah, no, exactly, because I had not done I had observed how exactly, let's say, Roland works with VFX, so this was the first time really I had this extensive experience with me being director and picking like frames and composition, focal length and whatnot. I realized actually the more challenging shot, interestingly, were the ones where I sometimes had plates, and let's say we had to remove something in the background, or let's say an oversight on my behalf on set, let's say where I didn't see something, or I was rushed. And you see, I hate the term "we fix it in post" because I tried to be as specific in. I'm very organized, so I tried to be as specific. So we storyboarded. I know, can we maybe show some storyboards? So I was very meticulous in terms of already. I knew going in which focal length I wanted, which lens, what the shot was. So I tried to leave nothing to change. But then, of course, sometimes when you have Luz chasing the sun, there was one element where I had actually, during the funeral scene, I had the tombstones made, the military tombstones actually made. But then they were not they were a little bit disproportionately organized, you know, and so it felt very contained and small, but it should look like Arlington, let's say, National Cemetery. So what we had to do, we had to replace the ground and redo the tombstone in visual effects. And that was, I think, one of the most challenging shots, because we had to then do leg replacements of one of the soldiers, because one leg was obscured, but then when you shifted in terms of the alignment, suddenly his leg was exposed, right? So we had to take the leg of another soldier and attach it to that one soldier. But the good thing is sometimes in filmmaking it's a show of hand, right? So we are somehow distracted by the jets, the F-07 or F-09 starfighters that fly above. So your eye is actually looking up instead of, like, say, what's on the ground, right? But then as a whole, you perceive it still as sort of like, as a whole, it looks real, right? So that's what I tried to do. For me, visual effects is such an incredible way of storytelling to add something, you know, for me, visual effects is often additive layer to uplift and enhance and elevate the story or the shot. So just to get it, see, that was that shot where the plane turns, right, where they have like this dogfight, it's called. So see, I was very meticulous. I would literally, we would draw this with the storyboard artist and give the visual effects team an idea. Or here, for instance, see like how a couple of scenes are blocked. If you want to go to the next, that's, for instance, like the sunrise. See, that's the Godspeed scene. So see, already, like, I knew who would be standing where, you know, with the X-15. Then if you go next, see, that was kind of like the sequence when the plane goes up. And then, so see, I already had edited the almost like the film in my head. So like if you go and then, so like the camera pushing inward and like see in the sunglasses, and you see the Star Spangled Banner, the flag, and then you see that was the flyover. And that's what I meant, Stuart, here in the foreground. So the ones we actually had done in production design were sort of like a little bit not as appropriately placed as I thought to provide depth in foreground and background. And so see, that was, for instance, something where maybe in the future I would actually start in right away with visual effects instead of having like something practically, you know, we have like special effects or visual effects. So I would much rather do that digitally than later having to sort of like reverse engineer. You see, that was, for instance, the scene of, you know, the Kennedy speech. And then, like, if you go to the next, exactly like his point of view, and then you see even here shots like from the helicopter in the front. And interestingly, that helicopter never took off. So it was always on the ground. That was like a little camera, exactly, Pascal. That was a camera trick with the crane. Because you see, it blocks around. So we kind of like, we track, and then we pan, and then sort of like it jibs down, sort of like we crane down to give it that illusion of it taking off.
I thought so, because like how many takes? Yeah. Otherwise, how many takes to cut and let's do it again? I was like, no, that's not possible.
And that was actually, who told me to do this. This was Roland Emmerich told me to do that because he had a similar shot in Moonfall, and I went up to him one time and I said, Roland, I remember on set, like, because it was a replica, it didn't have the propellers, the helicopter. Like, hey, remember the helicopter didn't take off. Like, and he said, oh yeah, I just jibbed down with the camera to give it that motion, but then you have to cut at the right time. And also on our Huey helicopter, we didn't have the blades. Those were added in visual effects. Also here, look, just give a sense of, you see like here pushing in on the X-15, and then you see pretty much already storyboarded, you see that frontal shot of the B-52. Then you see, we saw this, actually.
Underneath shot.
Correct, this underneath shot. So hold on to this, like make a visual note. So go to the next. And then of course here, the whole sequence of taking off. And then look here, attached to the X-15. Then also here, the landing.
One of the NASA shots from the underneath part.
Then you see, look here, it takes off the visor. And then you see cut to, you see this was pretty much, you see the shot from in profile.
Yes, with the visual effects opening.
Correct, yep. And then him disembarking. See, I had everything already laid out, like in terms of where everything was staged. So like here, people approaching him and him walking up to his wife, and sort of like the final moment. And so if you go back, if you can we go quickly back to the to one of the NASA references? Is that on the other presentation?
No, it's up here.
Correct. Like look, if you go to here, look the fifth one. One more down. You see, that was, for instance, that shot from underneath. For instance, that was used as a reference. Yeah. I thought this was quite flat, so I pulled the camera just a little bit back and had it a little bit more angled to give it just a little bit more. Correct. Yeah. Cool. But just the amount, Pascal, to answer your question, the amount of research that I went into this, and I thought about like how, you know, to make it as realistic as possible. So I watched, I think, 48 hours of NASA footage. That's how,
so
at
everything
the end,
you can get from the internet.
Everything, like actually, and from NASA themselves.
Okay,
they had these archives, and
nice.
That's how then at the end, to give it like some sense of realism, that's why I wanted to, at the end, have this montage of actual footage, so people, it's a progression, natural progression. It starts with, you know, Alan Shepard and then John Glenn that orbited Earth, and then, you know, the first sort of like spacewalk, they call it a EVA, extravehicular activity, and then all the way up on the moon landing, right? Yeah. So see, from the story I told, that's eventually how it leads up to the...
That was anyway a nice ending with having that additional story, the history told in the
I think it provides context to people, because I mean, this is like 1960s, and I wasn't alive at the time, right? So it's only from first-hand accounts that I can, let's say, imagine how it must have felt when like such an achievement was made. I thought that was just something very inspiring.
Cool. Yeah, I think, have you finished? Yeah.
20 minutes goes by fast.
Yeah, right. So thank you very much to showing us your piece of work. Really, absolutely beautiful. And I think also the amount of awards you get for this beautiful piece speaks for itself. So thank you very much.
What's next, John?
Yeah, that's the one thing. And then thank you, Pascal. And the one thing, so there was 2 moments that really are very special in this. One was when I received an email from Justin Wilkes. He's the president of Imagine Entertainment, and he said, like very humbly and so sweet, he said, "Oh, Ron and I," meaning Ron Howard, "Ron and I really enjoyed your film." So NASA was kind enough to share it with Ron Howard, and he actually watched it, and he was, I think, because he had done, of course, Apollo 13. So I almost thought about printing the email and framing it to have Ron Howard's praise. I also got from Edward Berger, the director of Conclave and All Quiet on the Western Front. He had seen it and wrote me the most incredible, beautiful note, like, "Wow, Jean, you did this." And this is my directorial debut. It was my first short as a director. And he said, "I don't know how you pulled this off with the budget and 4 shooting days." He was really like genuinely, wow, really impressed. Congratulations. And one of the greatest moments was when Roland, we had a screening at CAA, and Roland watched it in front of the big screen, and then in front of everybody, the film ended, and he just stands up, looks at me and says, "Jean, that was awesome." So that was such a wonderful moment from one of my mentors and idols, who I was a kid when I watched Independence Day, and from him to have that praise meant so much.
Congratulations.
And, yeah, Pascal, no, I mean, I've lived like you in the LA for almost 10, 15 years. And I think now is such a great moment to come back to Europe. And I would love to do I'm very inspired by Tim Fehlbaum's career, who is also a dear friend and who I admire. I worked for him on Tides, as Pierre said, and I think he did a great way of making movies in Europe, right? Like Hell and September 5. So I would love to do my first feature film, possibly in Europe, in Switzerland, with you guys, because I think we have great filmmakers in Switzerland. My DP was Swiss. My composer of this is Swiss. Hopefully my VFX supervisor in the future also will be Swiss. And,
yes, of course.
I would love to do a feature. I have some ideas. There's a book that Chris and I are currently looking at. And there's another, but I like to talk about when things are solidified and like tangible. But there's 2 ideas I have. I would love to do something genre in Switzerland, like sci-fi or action, because I think that would be cool. And I think we can do it. I think we have great filmmakers and tools.
Well, as I say, hopefully we will be back in 2 years.
Exactly. We made a vow yesterday at dinner, Nadesh and Pierre.
So
hopefully in 2 years with my feature debut at NIFFF, right?
Definitely.
Or 3. No pressure.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you very much for coming and being here. Sorry for the technical difficulties in the beginning, so we could not show the film on the big screen. But I think
we managed. I think it was bad. I wanted you to see it appropriately.
A little bit more cozy,
color graded,
and the first draft of the editing.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your interest. Thank you.